Welcome back to Stories from the Field, the Superintendent Podcast, where we tell the stories of educational leadership through the lens of equity. Sarah, how you doing?
Good. How are you? We're
Good.
back on.
We're back here. So look, we're going to tell the story about Dr. Mark Bedell's first year in Anne Arundel County Public Schools in Maryland. For those not aware, Maryland's a county-based system. So Anne Arundel County is where Annapolis is, the Naval Academy, the capital of Maryland. It's a very interesting place in that it has true diversity. It's also a city with some pretty difficult history, particularly around its relation to slavery. And, Anne Arundel's kind of a microcosm of the country in some ways.
Well, and I was envious that you got to go because my first road show 2 years ago with you was to Kansas City Public Schools. That trip just struck a chord with me because first it's near me. It's just a few hours away and very similar communities as Omaha, but it was kind of like being with a celebrity, being with Mark all day, And I mean, the love that so many people showed him, but also the work he did with the refugee center and everything that was going on with the career technical stuff. And I mean, the love he showed for every single kid and how they were so far behind. So I knew it was going to be, such a loss for Kansas City Public Schools, but such a shift for Dr. Bedell to go from, his place where everyone loved and appreciated and respected him. I mean, not probably at first, and then being moved to a completely different situation.
What was powerful about that visit to Kansas City for me was that, redlining was something that I read about in history books, right? I didn't understand until Dr. Bedell drove us around Kansas City that those lines still exist. I mean, remember, he literally drove us, he's like, okay, now here's where the red line was, right? True Street, yep. Right. And like on the other side, the sidewalks are all messed up. There's garbage and furniture kind of randomly on the street. And he turned around to us and said, my students have to walk on this sidewalk to get to school. The school's up there. They got to walk through this, And my mayor and I are fighting with each other because I think these sidewalks need to be fixed. And, that's the kind of leader he is. And so he was in Kansas City Public Schools for 6 years, which is, I believe he was the longest tenured superintendent there in 50 years. And when he showed up in Kansas City Public Schools, they had lost their accreditation from the University of Missouri. So a degree from KCPS did not grant you, I don't know exactly how the accreditation piece works, but basically the University of Missouri did not recognize a high school diploma from that district. And he made it his focus to get KCPS reaccredited again, which he accomplished by December of what ended up being his last year there.
It was cool. Yeah, really cool. I mean, he left a legacy, and there's no doubt about that. But tell me now how. Yeah. Tell me about where he is now.
It's amazing how school systems of somewhat similar size, Anne Arundel and Kansas City Public Schools, in the same ballpark in terms of student enrollment size, just how different these two places can be, how different the tone and tenor of the board meetings are. Anne Arundel County Public Schools is a much more kind of hyper-politicized environment, and you're going to see kind of how that played out, and you're going to see how Dr. Bedell came to town and focused on being relationship builder in chief. He figured, if I can build relationships with everybody in this community, we're going to be able to work together and solve some problems. We may not all agree, but at least we'll have relationships and trust between us so that when we disagree, we can trust that we're disagreeing in good faith.
I mean, he is probably, the biggest advocate for relationships, but in every podcast, Doug, that's been a kind of a through line. It's all about the relationships that you form with the community, the parents, the students.
There could be a lot of challenges to that because you're going to see in these episodes, there was a lot of really divisive behavior, a lot of kind of hyper-political, hyper-partisan behavior that has been a theme throughout this first year before he even got there. The theme of this is that if a leader builds relationships and listens and shows a genuine interest in hearing what everyone has to say, they've got the best shot at success as a leader. Dr. Bedell, thank you for sitting down with us. This has been a real great experience coming to visit your county and your schools and learning a little bit about all the work that's happening here. Tell us about the year. How was this first year for you? And reflect a little bit as you start the next school year.
I haven't even completed my first year here in Anne Arundel County, and it has been an absolute interesting year for me as a first-year superintendent here. It's the 37th largest school district in the country, 4th largest in the state of Maryland. We have roughly 85,000 students. We are projected to be the fastest growing school district in the state over the next 10 years. And it's a pretty well-performing school district, right? I'm not going to say it's great. I think we have
traditional measures, right?
Yeah, under traditional measures, I think we have an opportunity to become a phenomenal school district, and I believe once we get our strategic plan done, we'll be fine. But I came in and I started on August 8th. I implemented my 100-day plan, had an opportunity to just meet everybody across the county, conducted 16 listening and learning tours, met with students, met with teachers, met with advocacy groups across the entire county. And then probably about sometime in May, we released the post-entry plan, which now is housing Anne Arundel County libraries across the county for people to discover what I have learned. And so right now we're in the process of building our 5-year strategic plan, which will focus on equity, will focus on innovation, it will focus on student social, emotional, and academic growth for all students, and then implementation of the Maryland Blueprint for the future. We also, from another success standpoint, moved from 20th in starting teacher salary into the top 5 now.
In the state?
In the state. We went from average starting teacher salary was about $50,000 here. People we're hiring now will be coming in at $58,000 a year.
Was recruitment tough before? I mean, were you
having
trouble filling positions?
Very difficult. We opened up this school year with probably close to 300 vacancies.
Wow.
We have about 5,600 or 5,700 teachers. So we started this school year with a significant amount of vacancies, and I believe the salary disparities had a lot to do with that. We also managed to get everybody 8% pay raises across the system.
Wow.
6% COLAs and 2% generally for a step for most of our members. And then we also, for the first time, gave out 2 bonuses because we were significantly understaffed. People in our workforce had to do a lot more. So at sometime in December and sometime in June, we gave a $1,000 bonus to pretty much everybody except for myself as superintendent. So I'm excited, man. I've had a phenomenal first year.
In July, Anne Arundel County Schools got a new superintendent, Dr. Mark Bedell.
So Dr. Mark Bedell.
Anne Arundel Superintendent Dr. Mark Bedell.
Superintendent Dr. Mark Bedell. Dozens of Anne Arundel County teachers rallying against how their public school is addressing a staffing crisis.
Parents in Anne Arundel County are now scrambling to figure out how to get their kids to school.
Their children are forced to walk to school in the bitter cold along some dangerous highways.
A student had a gun with him nearly the entire school day.
It was just crazy someone brought a gun to school.
The data around weapons possession is even more concerning. We are on pace to double last year's numbers in terms of possession and or use of knives.
A student on the bus had pepper spray, handed it to another student, and that student discharged it. There was no altercation, no fight, no disagreement that we're aware of.
We've had a number of violent incidents that have occurred in our school district, right? Kids showing up with guns and, violent disciplinary infractions. I brought all of that to the community. I had a press conference with the mayor, with Colonel Sapp from Fort Meade base, the county executive, our board chair, and we invited all of the media outlets in to show them the data, but to also say to our community, we need help. I don't want to be the next school district on national news because of somebody getting killed in one of my schools. But I put that stuff out there, and I think that has created this trust that I think I've been able to generate within the community around just being an honest and transparent person.
Yeah.
That sounds like an action-packed first year, but of course he handled everything with a level head.
Well, yeah, that is always kind of his approach, is to hear everything out. But I have to tell you, when we were there in town, they were in the thick of it with this flag policy issue.
I mean, are flags that big of an issue, really?
Please pause for the invocation. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance. Stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding.
It's done under the guise of a flag. That's not what this is really about.
One side has chosen to make people's identity, who they are, whether they be black, brown, LGBTQ+, or other, into a political football. And then they turn around and say that political footballs should not be in schools.
Some people in our country are closed-minded when it comes to fairness.
Right.
But they want their child to be treated in a fair way.
We are not against anybody. We do not hate anybody. My children have been taught, and I live my life as a Christian, loving all.
I don't want to hear what your opinion is. I don't care. Leave our children alone.
We seem to think that if you give equality to a group of people, that it will diminish the equality of other people, and by that I mean white, straight people.
Well, like I said, they're niche groups. They're appealing to a few people. They're not appealing to the whole country. They're appealing to a niche group.
I don't know a lot because I don't have a child in school, but I'm trying to find out tonight. That's why I'm here. But I know there's two sides. My side is the American flag.
A flag policy. This is something that's been brought up in many districts around the country. It's one of the initiatives brought by a group called Moms for Liberty. It's now a national network of moms and parents. The ask of the district is to ban all flags from campus except the U.S. flag and the state flag. So a couple of the board members proposed this, and the way it works on any kind of board, if somebody proposes something and someone else seconds it, then it goes to the floor for discussion. This issue about flags was on the floor for discussion for almost 3 months, for several board meetings, during which public comment was solicited, and believe me, there was a lot of public comment and a lot of real passion and a lot of tears and a lot of anger and fear.
So what was his take, on the whole flag thing?
The superintendent's role in any kind of policy discussion like this, even a heated, hyper-political one like this, is to be the educator in the room, the expert, to provide advice and counsel to the Board of Ed. And he gave his opinion about what he thought the board should do, and I'll let him say it in his own words.
In no way do I believe that this process has been a wasted exercise, as some have stated. Discussions like these are difficult, but they are the essence of the democratic process and of the free thought we want to cultivate in every student we serve. Everyone has had a chance to have their voice heard in one form or another in this process. We need to promote civil discourse, as I stated in my very first board meeting on August 24th, 2022. We need to empower creative thinking in our students, our employees, and our community. We must never tell our students what to think, because we're not here to indoctrinate nobody. But we absolutely must teach them how to think, just so there's no misunderstanding. I want to be clear that I believe there is a huge difference in flags that fly on flagpoles outside of a school building and those on display inside. Our classrooms, as a former teacher, are places where relationships that cultivate a sense of belonging for students are created. That belonging leads to growth, which leads to success. In those spaces, I am hesitant to mandate the inclusion or exclusion of flags, other than those that run afoul of law or board policy, because drawing such a line inescapably leaves a student or group of students on the other side.
No one wins when we enact one inequity to solve another perceived inequity. As we sit here today, there's a clear division. Healing must occur if we are to move forward, especially when it comes to controversial issues. We simply need to do a better job of talking with each other instead of at each other. My recommendation at this time, based on everything that we have heard, is to not approve policy IS, display of flags as it is currently written. Madam President, that concludes my remarks to this matter.
Yeah. And even yesterday in the board meeting, I had to make it very clear to everybody. We're not here trying to indoctrinate anybody's child. I have a she's going to be a 7th grader next year. I don't want nobody indoctrinating my child.
Right.
I want to be the one that wants to make sure that I'm educating my child around the values and beliefs that my wife and I want to impart on our kids.
Like most parents.
Like most parents, right?
Yeah.
So I get that. So do you have people who may go rogue? I think in every organization.
Yeah.
You're going to have 5 to 10% of people who are going to do something that goes against what we should be doing. You can't paint that picture that that's the narrative for a whole school district when you got a handful of people who go rogue on things where, yes, you kind of crossed the line. And as a superintendent, we have a responsibility to make sure that we address that from a personnel standpoint, but to also make sure and reassure our families that's not what we're trying to do.
So it's pretty amazing. As an outside observer, it seems that Dr. Bedell handled this sort of calmly and gracefully. I know that there were a lot of tense and not calm moments for everyone involved throughout this. At the board meeting, when they make the final vote, the Board of Ed trustees who voted for this flag policy against Dr. Bedell's recommendation and against the majority of the board, you don't sense vitriol. You don't sense disgust with Dr. Bedell. You don't sense anger. What I see when I listen to that recording or watch that video is people who respect each other who just feel differently about something. And, I see an educator sticking up for what he thinks is best for kids. In retrospect, at our Equity Institute, and was very instructive for all the educational leaders or aspiring leaders in the room about how to use relationships and relationship building to work through a challenge so that, you're never all going to agree, but the schools can move on with the business of teaching and learning.
Well, it's like, you have your own opinion about something until you hear that those parents with both of their opposing viewpoints, you might not change your mind, but at least you hear a different perspective. And Dr. Bedell is so good at being so even keeled about that. Were there any other political issues going on besides this strong flag stance?
I think Mark would not want people to interpret his kind of, calm and level-headed approach as, a lack of passion or a lack of opinion. He's got strong opinions about this stuff, and he shares them. Bigger picture context around race here. Dr. Bedell is the first African-American man to lead this school system. I mentioned at the top of the episode that Annapolis has, a history of connection to the slave trade, and Maryland was one of those states that kept slavery but didn't join the Confederacy. So there's some complicated things there, and we're going to hear from some folks who've talked about some of the challenges that students of color have faced in the community, which is Maryland is a hyper political place in general, and we're going to hear him reflect a little bit about what it's like to be the first African American male superintendent in Anne Arundel County. And
when you are the first, and there's a lot of firsts still happening, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, where you still have school districts that have not ever had a permanent female superintendent or, a person of color or a male of color. We've had some black female superintendents here. So naturally there's going to be pressure that you do not want to be the one to mess it up for somebody else that looks like you, that has an opportunity to come behind you, right? So that's just a natural pressure that we have when you are the very first. And I do feel like, people will sit back and they'll be like, look, there were people who weren't happy with me being hired. Make no mistakes about it. I mean, even when I went to Kansas City, that happened. There were some people like, who is this guy they're bringing in? That is a natural part of the territory of being a superintendent. Not everybody's going to be happy with you coming in.
Right.
So what I have always tried to do as a leader is to not try to be anybody else but the best Mark Bedell that I could be. And to let people know, like, don't get it mixed up. I'm not a quota. They didn't hire me because, hey, we need to get the first black male superintendent here. They hired somebody who happens to be good at what he knows how to do, and I just happen to be black.
With a strong track record of
With a
success
strong
in
track
another
record
district.
for all kids. White kids, black kids, Hispanic kids. Speaks for itself. Everywhere that I've gone, everything that I've touched, it has been a net plus by the time I finished up in my assignments in my 24 years in education.
So there are people out there who would listen to you and me chatting right now and say we're being woke, right? Because we're talking about race, right? I mean, I just saw a story in the news. The state superintendent in Oklahoma is trying to enact a policy where you can teach the Tulsa massacre without talking about race, right? So that is a viewpoint that's out there. We all encounter it. I'm trying to figure out a way to explain, why this is not us being woke. This is a real experience, and it's not, because it's very easy to say, oh, people are people. Doesn't matter what your skin color is. Doesn't matter. Like, people are people. Best person gets the job, which is kind of what you're saying. But why is it different for educational leaders? What's the?
Yeah, it's just the polarization of what's happening right now in education from a political standpoint. For me, everybody talks about critical race theory. I said, man, come on, give me a break on that. Like, for me, I'm all about culturally responsive teaching. That's the CRT I focus on. I want every single one of our kids to see themselves reflected in our curriculum from a resiliency standpoint. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that all of our kids see themselves reflected in the curriculum from a resiliency standpoint around the contributions that we all have made to help get this country to where it is. And for me, there's nothing divisive about that. I've said to everybody in my listening and learning tours, I look at equity in two different ways. And I've said this at several national conferences. I define it as twofold. One, equity has to be about understanding that we have a system that has harmed children of color intentionally. And how do we work as a community to recognize that these things have happened historically, to then make sure that we pave a path forward where we truly create a sense of belonging for everybody. And then the other phase of it is equity from a standpoint of decisions that we have made internally in our system that harm kids. And that means you could be harming white kids who are high achievers. You could be harming children with disability. You can be harming children that show up socially economic status, poor. And how do we make sure that we don't create inequities that harm children internally because of decisions that we have made? So it's twofold for me, right? For me, it's all about value add in everything that I do for every kid that shows up in this school district. And I think sometimes everybody wants to just say, well, you do equity and you only want to focus on black and brown children who are marginalized or poor. Nah, I'm focusing on all of it. Yeah. Because all of it is a part of equity, right? And if I got high achievers in this district who show up already resourced, but we're not pushing them, we're not producing enough national merit scholars, even though we should have more, that's an inequity that we created there. Or if we got areas in our county, like rural parts of our county, where we can't pick up kids because our transportation is not the way it needs to be. Now these kids aren't going to school. Parents are having to sacrifice working in order to get their kids to school. You're creating inequities. So there are a lot of ways that I try to define that to make sure that everybody understands we're going to be a district that will not commit harm to any of our kids. And that's the way that I lead. And I'm unapologetic about how I define it. And I share that at all 16 of my listening and learning tours.
So yeah, what's amazing about all this, Sarah, is that despite some of the tension that exists in the district around race and some of the tension he has felt and experienced, particularly early on with some of the groups in the community, he's managed to go and build those relationships. He went on a 16-stop listening tour all over the county, and it's a big county. It's got rural, it's got urban, and he went all over the place to talk to folks. He built a relationship with the county executive, who we're going to hear from in a little bit, with local preachers, with leaders in the community, with the teachers union president. Everybody has a story about how Dr. Bedell reached out to them to try to understand what they're working on and understand their why. And I think that's the kind of theme for anybody aspiring to any sort of leadership, particularly educational leadership. Listen to Dr. Bedell's words and his process and strategies.
Well, and it's that word relationships again, but it's more than that. He didn't go tap the shoulders of the people that he knew would agree or be on the same page with him. He reached out maybe even to the tough, challenging people to make sure that those relationships were also cultivated.
I mean, the first thing I did was, I don't generally take to social media because everybody's big and bad on there, but I wanted to see what some of the feedback was after my announcement came out. I mean, I saw the feedback and the reactions from people in Kansas City. I wanted to see how were people feeling about, a black man coming into Anne Arundel County. They've never had a black male superintendent here. So, first thing I'm thinking is, I wonder how that's going to be received, right? So I took to the account, and for the most part, a lot of positive feedback, but I also was being told by people that there were some groups here that have concerns with me being hired, right? And in some cases, probably some of our more conservative groups. So I was very intentional when I got here, and this is just advice that I would give to anybody. If there are groups that you hear may not be excited about you coming, make those your priority to meet with first. And then sit down in a room with them and say, hey, here's what I'm hearing. I don't know if it's true. Here's what I'm reading. Let's talk through this, because what you may think that of who I am, you may be surprised that that's not who I am. That's not totally who I am.
So you ask for the meeting, and you show up basically with no agenda, but let me hear you out. Yeah.
And I think that's the first way that you can begin to help develop some trust. And if you go to social media and you look at some of the groups I met with and you look at what they posted, it's a lot of positive feedback that, number one, people just want to feel that they're being heard.
Yes.
That you're looking them in the face and that they're being heard. Now, reality is, when I meet with these people, and I said this yesterday in our 5-hour board meeting, I'm not going to be able to do everything that everybody wants me to do. So when I meet with all of these different groups and they give me pages of things that they want me to do, I tell them right off the top, we're not going to be able to do all of that. Maybe 2 or 3 of them I can look at trying to do, but you're not getting everything. Nobody gets everything.
Nobody gets everything.
That's just, it's just not even realistic. So letting people know that and setting that expectation from the beginning, but you will be heard in the areas where I believe I can help you. I will work to help you. And so for me, it's been easy for me to then to say in a board meeting like I did yesterday that there's not a single group that I met with that can say they weren't heard and that I did not try to address some of their issues. I have tried to address issues with every single group that I have met with, and that's all you can do. Yeah. And I think from there, you begin to build some level of trust with these different organizations that then when it's time to do some things that are a little bit harder, you kind of they give you a little bit more grace.
Yeah.
Because they know you're coming from a good place. Your heart is coming from a good place. And I've tried to lead in this manner that, for me, I have both conservative and liberal values. I do. Now, I think people think, he's just extremely to the left. No.
I'm talking about you personally.
Me personally.
Yeah, right.
There are conservative values that I have just as much as there are liberal values that I have. And when I sit down and talk with people, I share with these people. Here's my values and some of my beliefs. This is who I am. And, at least people walk out knowing what they're dealing with. I think the key is for a superintendent to survive, a lot of people don't want to get personal. You don't want people to know who you are. But I think people got to know who you are from a humanistic approach. Because most people put you on a pedestal and they look at you as a robot, like you are, like you have all the answers, like you are, and I don't. I tell people this, I'm just a regular guy put on my pants like everybody else. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to pretend that I do. But I do know that a lot of our solutions are right here within our community. And if we work together, we can all move this school district forward.
So many examples of leadership and relationship building here, right?
Totally. I mean, it's the through line of this episode for sure.
Well, let's take a listen to what folks in the community have to say about him.
Dr. Bedell is the most popular person when he walks into a room.
Dr. Bedell is a good addition to the school system.
Yeah, he's been very transparent.
I have loved working with Dr. Bedell.
Dr. Bedell gets it.
As a parent, I have seen him try to engage in the community.
He is dedicated.
He is able to connect with the kids.
I have seen him listen to all sides of issues, which I very much respect.
He is truly driven, as he says, to make a school environment where every student belongs.
In the next episode of Stories from the Field, the Superintendent Podcast, we're going to look at some of the other work that Dr. Bedell has been up to over the past year and how relationship building has played a role there.
Excited for that next episode.
So please join us again for Stories from the Field, the Superintendent Podcast.
To create these stories, it takes a village. This episode was directed by John Freeman, videography and audio by Sho Matsuyama, Chase Mazo, John Freeman, Sarah Kroll, and Doug Roberts. Edited by John Freeman, Chase Mazo, and Sho Matsuyama. Stories from the Field podcast was produced for IEI with Century Tree Productions. Be sure to like and share these stories with anyone and everyone. Yes, they are that inspiring. IEI is committed to bringing educational leaders together to ensure that they have the influence, access, resources, and support they need to lift students' voices. We empower superintendents to amplify their voices, becoming thought leaders who shape the future of education.